European leaders are clutching their pearls around Ukraine's Zelensky after President Trump whacked him with the dictator without elections label on Truth Social. Trump griped that Zelensky's botching the war with Russia, wasting U.S. taxpayer cash, and dodging elections, and concluded that he'd better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Trump, it would seem, has been apparently triggered by Zelensky saying that he lived in a Russian echo chamber. The Economist, for its part, has said that if Ukraine held elections today, then Zelensky would get walloped by his ex-top general, Valery Zaluzhnyi. It should also be pointed out that Zelensky's term did end in May 2024, but he's dodged elections, blaming martial law, leaving Putin to shrug and say he's no longer a legal or legitimate leader of his country. Ukrainians, too, seem fed up with their wartime boss, whose trust ratings crashed from a golden 90% in 2022 to just over 50% last month. And the reaction to this in the halls of power in European capitals has been nothing less than hysterical. Czech Prime Minister Peter Pavel called Trump's jab cynical, while the UK's very unpopular Prime Minister Keir Starmer dialed Zelensky to cheerlead, saying wartime election skips are as British as tea, even though the United Kingdom did hold elections during World War II. Germany's Olaf Scholz tweeted, "It's wrong and dangerous to doubt Zelensky's democratic credentials," and U.S. Democratic lawmakers like Schumer and Schiff, well, they also piled on, slamming Trump's supposed cozying up to President Vladimir Putin. Even Canada's twink of a Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, channeling his inner substitute drama teacher, using his dreamy eyes and luxuriant hair, well, he also demanded that Zelensky be afforded a seat at the big table with Russia and the United States. And the European media coverage has already begun, and for their part, the UK press are already accusing President Trump of having been recruited by the Soviet KGB back in the 1980s. And yes, really, this is where we are. And while we as individuals cannot do anything about the cacophony of stupidity being verbally vomited by the so-called leaders of the Atlantic nations, we can do something about our own well-being, and it's called NMN. And instead of me telling you what it is, let's let the guy who discovered MNN explain it.
I also take supplements, and in fact most of my colleagues are in the field of aging, or anti-aging as people call it. So I take NMN every morning.
What is NMN?
Good question. So let me take a quick step back.
Sure.
So about 20 years ago, Lenny Guarente and a team of us at MIT discovered a set of genes that controls aging. And what they do is they protect all organisms on the planet, plants, bacteria, humans, from deterioration and disease. They're like the Pentagon. They sense when we're hungry, sense when we're exercising, and they send out the troops to defend us. And so we think that these genes are responsible for the effects of dieting and exercise, which is great. What that means is we can now mimic that with molecules.
I feel like I should make a shopping list.
So with NMN, you get improved energy, weight management, endurance, and strength. There are lots of videos on YouTube of people that have taken it for 1-2 years. Look them up yourself. Seems like everyone who takes it feels better. I know I myself have been taking it for a year now, and I really do feel the difference. Another key mention is resveratrol, which pairs well with NMN, and Black Forest obviously offers both, but with NMN, it stands out by boosting your NAD+ production, and this helps restore youthful functions that you lose with age, like energy, flexibility, and smoother skin. Think wrinkles. So check out my sponsor, Black Forest, via the links below. I'd appreciate it if you did, and I think you might be pleasantly surprised. I've been. The Munich Security Conference I recently covered in a video this week, well, it has served up a seismic shift between the United States and its EU vassals, with Europe huffing and puffing and carrying on a hullabaloo show and igniting fiery debates, and pleas for Europe to flex some muscle against Washington. Muscle, I might add, they do not have. Hilariously, the American helot, Germany, which is still under de facto occupation, thinks it has any kind of leverage over the hegemon. In that, yesterday, the German foreign minister warned that if the US doesn't back Europe's so-called liberal democracies, it'll pay a price. and that Europe's ramping up pressure after the US and Russia held talks without EU or Ukraine representatives. And the foreign minister was clear: no one dictates war or peace for Europe or Ukraine. Reality would say something different, I would like to remind her. But what is clear, of course, is that European bureaucrats, such as the foreign minister, well, they're very used to pantomime and performative posturing. But despite all the threats and despite the so-called ramping up of pressure, I'll give you a spoiler alert. Despite the drama, US-EU relations, they're not going to budge an inch. The US is still firmly in charge, right where the EU wants them to be. The real issue isn't America abandoning Europe. That's the distraction. Europe's leaders, for their part, they feign fear of being left alone, yet they know Washington isn't going anywhere. With US troops, nuclear weapons, and NATO's grip, Europe remains a key battleground in the US-Russia standoff, as it is not a power in its own right. The politicians and bureaucrats in the EU, well, they decry disengagement publicly, but their true fear is that the US might actually step back, forcing them to fend for themselves. Geopolitically, Europe is irrelevant, and they know this simple fact. Their only voice comes from that which America allows. And most of all, the larger countries, Germany, France, Italy, they don't want a war, as they fully understand that their citizens wouldn't support it. It's only the Baltics and a few other small fries, that being smaller countries, that rattle the saber at Russia. But they know they will be ignored faster than a wallflower if Berlin or Paris or Rome cut a deal with Moscow. And the bigger worry for these clinging Atlanticists within the EU isn't Russia. It's a Franco-German deal with Moscow that could leave them even more irrelevant. Back in Washington, it's clear that the Trump team enjoys mocking European dependency, yet the EU, for their part, cling to their anti-Russian narratives, too scared to break free. And for now, America's grip holds firm, and Europe stays captive, not to Russia, but to its own reliance on Washington. And on this bluster, yesterday, French President Emmanuel Macron declared that Europe's stepping into a new era and needs to beef up its military spending. Basically, he's pushing to bolster Europe's security backbone and collective muscle. But how would this ever work? Who is going to pay for it or fill the boots that he and other hawkish NATO leaders want? But looking at the absolute state of Europe, well, it's skipped out on any meaningful military spending, with a few exceptions, for 80 years. They've trashed their own nations via endless economic welfare for all the world to arrive and enjoy. They've ripped up the social contract, made any kind of speech that questions their narratives illegal, and have for decades been in the business of transforming the bloc's demographics. Now they're saying we will become patriotic nations with grand armies. So how then, pray tell, are European nations supposed to muster these new armies? Their cultural deconstruction, at least in the West, has been for decades centered around self-loathing, historical guilt, and outsourcing identity. So who then will be signing up to fight and die for this mess that they have created? Now, then, returning to Vance's Munich speech, it wasn't just a jab. I believe it's a seismic shift. The US-Europe economic and, more importantly, values gap has been drifting for a long time now, but it's widening fast. The transatlantic alliance has been stuck in a Cold War time warp of sorts for the last 30 years, and the big question is, does Europe have the power to end this mentality and start fresh, or will they just continue to kick the can down the road? The EU has been using the specter, the boogeyman, if you will, of Russia as the glue to hold itself together for a long time. But the cracks are now beginning to show, and it looks to be crumbling. If the US pivots, as it is doing now, to China and the Pacific, Europe is going to have to pick, cling to their old failing playbook, or adapt. Unfortunately, as of publishing this video, it's clear to me that Europe refuses to stand on its own. Either it cannot or it will not. And thus, why it is not Moscow the EU fears, but Washington, as well as their own people. So thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up on the way out, and also check to see that you are still subscribed, as YouTube has unsubscribed tens of thousands of people without their knowledge or consent. As well, please remember to check out my sponsor, Black Forest, and its amazing product, MNN, for your health and rejuvenation. Link is in the description. With that, I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.